Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's conversation. I think it's going to be a rich one as we look at our gender representation survey and we speak to our panel just around their insights and knowledge on this subject in their own personal experiences and for their organizations. My name is Pride, and I will be representing SheSays today. And I wanted us to first congratulate, I guess, the SheSays team with their partners on a really incredible survey that they've put together. The gender representation survey in Adland is the first one in South Africa, as we know, and it's covered a lot of bases. It's a 50-page report. Oh, I think I might have people coming on. If I can request that everyone stays on mute for the duration. You're welcome to keep your camera on. I think the bandwidth should be fine. I'd like to see faces. But as I was saying, it's a 50-page report that covers the results of the gender representation survey. It also covers insights, thought pieces from the top 40 industry leaders. And what I think you will find interesting is just the point of view everybody's had on gender representation, but inclusivity as a whole in the industry. A big part of it that I want to talk through as well is the sectors that have been covered are quite wide. We looked at PR, marketing, advertising, and digital. And overall, the responding agencies, we had 35 responding agencies. It's a little difficult to tell how many agencies we have currently in South Africa. However, I think 35 is quite a substantial number. But not only that, it allowed us to look across different roles, 72 roles in total, across creative, strategy, client services, technology, media, and support. In support, looking at finance and HR. I think before we introduce our panel, I'd like to look through some of the results as a quick browse. You will receive the survey at the end in its totality, but it was a good place to start by looking at our industry, which is actually, in fact, 61% female, which might surprise a lot of people. And this is a good number to look at when you start looking at the breakdown of the roles. In the creative roles, the Chief Creative Officer, which is the coveted role at 61% male. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of what we'll be reviewing because I think it's important to get really good clarity on the different areas. For example, client services, which is predominantly female, all the way from the top and right down to account director. If you look at the data and strategy, which is 53% led by male and a mix of male and female as you go down to different functions within that area. And in production, which is dominated by female, all the way from head of production down to traffic managers. I think this is very familiar to a lot of you if you are in fact in the advertising industry. Social media, which is newer sector to many of the agencies. When I say new, I just mean in the last couple of years, predominantly dominated by female. And what might surprise you is then the next section, which is the digital side. Sorry, that went a little fast. I'm just gonna go back. Okay, let me go through that again. So social media, dominated mainly by females. And as you go into the digital space, majority being very much a male environment. When you look through technology, it starts to become very stark, especially in the back end when you look at software engineering and app development. And of course, in our media area, quite a female support. And in the support area, finance and HR also split in that way. And head of IT, not surprisingly, at 100% male. These results are indicative of what we found as we walk through the data in the survey. And I'd like to start by thanking our partners in this initiative, Kantar, working through the survey with us as a research partner, MNC Saatchi Group as our design partner, and obviously the industry bodies that were involved in helping us collect the information, and put it together. IAB, the Association of Communication and Advertising, as well as the AMF. With that in mind, I'd like to now welcome, okay. I'd like to now welcome our panelists for the day. I think in our pre-conversations, what we tried to do was have a discussion around the results, but also have a discussion about what it means to them to have inclusivity in the environment. Mpume Ngobese, Managing Director of Joe Public. Mashigo, Chief Creative Officer of MNC Saatchi Abel. Camilla Clerke, Executive Creative Director at HelloFCB, and Jared Sinman, Chief Executive Officer of VML&R South Africa, none of whom actually need major introduction in the industry. And I think it's a very important time to also note that as a SheSays community, we usually bring together women to talk about a lot of conversations that we have. It was important that when we look at a gender representation study, we bring male into the room, because this is not something that should sit with women alone. For our discussion today, we're also going to touch on inclusivity as a whole, because there's a lot more intersectionality that happens in this environment, which includes gender, race, age, and many others that we're experiencing in our spaces. I want to start my conversation with the word inclusivity and what it means. I'm going to ask Mpume first, what does inclusivity mean to you? And I think, how have you, in your organization, applied inclusivity in how you operate daily, especially now in 2020?
Thanks, Pride, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel honored to be part of this panel. So inclusivity for me really goes over and above the gender and race inclusivity dimension. My definition, it transcends the obvious, so it goes deeper, so that we begin to understand the intersectionality dimensions that exist. So you've already spoken about age. It goes to being able-bodied versus people living with a disability, education access, ethnicity, being a Black female versus just being a female, and so on and so forth. And in a world where women are often underestimated and oversimplified, my belief is that Black women have been dealt an even tougher hand with the intertwined barriers at the intersection of race and gender. And we all know the challenge is not so much about our industry per se, it's a global challenge where these people, or Black females, have to confront the social dynamics that come together and create challenges that are quite unique to Black females as a whole. So that would be my definition of inclusivity, going beyond the obvious narrative. In terms of what we've done as a business, in our business at Joe Public United, we have 5 specialist agencies, and out of that, 4 of them are run by females. So you could say 80% of our business is run by females. And it doesn't end there. It's inclusive of all races. So we've got 2 Black female leaders, we've got an Indian female leader, and a white female leader. And if you ask me, that's power, that's inclusivity. But with that said, to recognize that there's a lot more that we need to do as business to ensure that representation goes across all levels of the organization and across all disciplines. And in that regard, we've completed a full audit of the people that we have in our organization to understand the current state, so that as we begin to correct the current states, we know where we're standing and we know the areas that we can impact.
I like that you spoke about, the intersectionality between different things that are holding the agenda, basically, and that those are things you need to unlock. Camilla, on your side, what's your definition of inclusivity and your view on how you've managed it in your organization?
Hey guys, firstly, cheers.
Water.
There we go, there we go. Yes, we could be doing this in person, but anyway. Wow, that started something. I think there are just two things that I want to talk about on this topic. And I think firstly, it's the big difference between diversity and inclusivity. And I think it's a mistake thinking that they're the same thing. So diversity is getting many different people around a table, so age, gender, just making sure that everyone is seen there. But I think what inclusivity is making sure that everyone is heard and everyone is being valued. And I think for me personally, I've seen diversity, but I don't know if I'm seeing the right kind of inclusivity at the moment. And I think there's some very practical steps that one can put in place in order to make sure that this is the case. And I think, firstly, it's about just creating a safe space, sort of mentally, psychologically, for people to be able to contribute and to share their thoughts without being afraid or worried about others will think. Another big one that I think is missed out on is really as managers and team leaders being able to truly listen. So not just assume you know what someone else is going to say, but actually take it in and make someone sort of very heard. And I think lastly, it's about how we really embed it into agency culture. So it's all fair and well saying it, but what are you actually doing in your agency to make it a reality? And I think that starts with your agency values. So what truths do you stand by? I know for us, we call it sort of 6 human truths to better connect. And all of them are based in empathy and inclusivity. And I think it starts there.
I've always had that thought about the quantity versus the quality of what inclusivity starts to look like. When I spoke to Nell in our pre-conversation, one of the things I said to him was, I'm not sure walking through, I'm an outsider, I'm on the client side, but walking through agencies, I'm not sure we understand women in an empathetic way. Now, could you maybe give us your view of what inclusivity starts to look like and how you've handled it? And maybe reference some of that conversation around around empathy. And I'm bringing it up because if I were in advertising, I'm not sure if I would understand the culture. And this is an outsider's view. You know, there's an energy in advertising that I always experience that for me does feel very male. And I wanted to know what that looks like when we start talking about actually being more inclusive in the culture.
Yeah, I think firstly I agree with Camilla in identifying the differences. And what we have done as a business, we've looked at it and we said, as a leadership, we can't claim to know. We can't claim to have the answers by ourselves. So what we have a diversity and inclusivity committee, and that's what we call it. And it includes everyone at every level. And here, people within the different spaces in our businesses can put forward ideas on how we can make our business more inclusive. And this committee has shown to be like actually amazing. It's at a management level, there's things that you would neglect, thinking that you are helping people, but you are actually neglecting the little things. And I think going back to our conversation yesterday, I think what was quite enlightening is that I figured out that what we are dealing with a system that has that permeates throughout beyond the business. It actually starts within our families and how we are raised, and that starts to shape how we engage with people outside. And the changes that we are trying to implement in our business in trying to recognize people for who they are and allowing them the space to be, the hard work starts from our homes and our relationships, and in a bigger cultural context and differences between us as a people. And I think within our diversity and inclusivity committee, we've actually had to acknowledge little things like what happens to people that work and are pedestrians. Like their life is different to somebody who drives. And for instance, in our Joburg agency, we've got 2 entrances, but we use one for cars. But the other entrance is more appropriate for pedestrians. And at the committee, that was raised. That might be a minute little thing, but it's very difficult when you're sitting at management thinking that you will think about that space. But I think that the power lies in actually, even in those decision-making areas, we are inclusive.
Camilla said something very important earlier about the diversity versus inclusivity, and how in diverse environments you have a lot of people. When I was looking at the results, one of the things that stood out for me was it felt like there were some sacred cow roles or divisions. You know, I looked at the technology where it's 100% male versus social media, which then becomes 100% female. Both actually don't balance out, in my view. So it's not one or the other. But the role that I wanted to talk about most is the creative environment, where people walk into creative spaces for that coveted role as lead creative. And I wanted to ask, what's the view on improving the number of women who can be in that role, given the years we've been in advertising, the number of women like Camilla we've seen come through the ranks? Why is it that we're still in the back foot on key roles like the ECD role? I wonder if, Camilla, would you like to contribute in that conversation?
Sure. I mean, I don't even know if I have the answer, truth be told, but I think, you know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a hard role to get. I just think that it's a hard role for a woman to occupy. I think, you know, agencies, whether it's intentional or not, have made it quite difficult for women to take on these intensive creative roles, and, you know, probably for a number of reasons. You know, and I can only talk on a personal level, but, you know, firstly, not having all that many strong female creative role models to look up to, I would say, is the first one. I mean, growing up in the industry, it was Fran Lucken, bang, you know. So I would say that is the first thing. It makes you feel as a woman that you don't really deserve to take that seat, and it's almost just done by chance. I think there's also a culture in advertising that you've got to just drop everything and be available all the time. And I think traditionally that has been quite a lot harder for women. You know, you got to collect the kids at 4. No, you got to be in the review. You know, maybe you can't go on a bender with all the boys in the evening because you've got other responsibilities, and for that, you know, you looked at slightly differently. And then I think on a personal level, and this is something that I openly admit to now, but it took me a while to be really conscious of it, is it's this thing we all know called imposter syndrome, where you don't feel sort of secure in the role. And I've spent a lot of time just trying to work out why that is, why I walking initially into the role of a creative director just feel like sort of I didn't belong there. And I think it's because when I first went in, I tried to lead like a man, like all the other examples I'd seen. I'd bark out at the boardroom table. I mean, I threw out the occasional penis joke. You know, I did what I could to feel like I participated in that role, but ultimately it was inauthentic, wasn't genuine, it wasn't me, and I faltered. And you know, then took myself off to see a life coach and really work it out. And sort of turns out that I've got a very different leadership style. And when I started to really nurture that, I realized that, you know, I could be vulnerable. If I didn't have the answers, so what? You know, reach out for advice if you want to. Then it really propelled me forward, and I finally started feeling comfortable in the role. And I think unless we open up the space and allow women to lead in ways that feel comfortable to them, we're just not going to get many in that role.
Jared said something similar to me in our conversation, and he speaks about being a progressive industry. Jared, I'd like to ask you to contribute to this part, because you've been in moments where you've promoted women, you've advocated for women. What needs to happen that in environments for us to actually recognize women in their leadership roles in their own style?
Yeah, so thanks for the chance to chat today. I think that we all have quite short memories, or this industry has got lots of young people in it. So we forget that 20 years ago, there were lots of women in leadership in the ad industry as well. The people like Nunu and Nirok, who was leading Grey and so forth. It's not really a great achievement that we have some women in management roles, because this industry has always slanted towards that. I think the creative portfolio is particularly interesting because it's the place where a lot of power lies in agencies. Creative businesses and creative agencies, the chief creative officer and the creative directors in the business have a lot of power. They make a lot of the decisions. They shape the tone of the agency. They shape most of the work that goes out the door. And I think that is a better barometer of how transformed our industry is than some of these other roles, which have always been traditionally female, for lots of different reasons. And I think sadly, when you look at that, not only in South Africa but globally, the story you're seeing is that power is still sitting with men, mostly white. In most of the agencies, and I think that I'm interested in the distribution of power rather than the distribution of titles, because it's easy to hand out a title, but it's much more difficult and it's much less likely that power is going to be handed over. So yeah, I think, I'm not, I think that's just when I looked at the results, that for me came through quite strongly. I think that in the end of the day, I thought all the answers that I've heard are great, and we're lucky to have businesses in this country and in our industry that are doing so much to promote change. But I actually think the biggest change that has to happen is a personal psychological one. What I experience with a lot of the women that I've worked with over the years is women arrive in the workplace at a huge deficit to men because they've been brought up to believe that they can't do as much as a man can do. And unless you have an organization that is focused on helping that person to overcome that and is also actively holding back men from claiming the space that women aren't stepping into, it doesn't really matter what other things you do. You can have all kinds of other structures and processes, but if you can't win in the psyche, you actually can't win as an organization. So I think the most important work is the coaching work, is the mentoring work, is the work that really helps women to say, I'm just as good as any man. I have just as much right to speak up. My ideas are just as good. And I think once that happens, then real change will transpire. So that's just a few thoughts from my side.
I think what you're talking about there is having patient programs, because two things you mentioned is building up the woman to be in the position to be empowered to do it. But the second being holding off the men from taking over those roles that are actually available. So it's a two-part game. And how do you do that? One of the glaring obvious stats to me was in the support side, where your finance team was actually predominantly women, and yet your finance directors were all male. And that was a clear signal of that patient coaching not being active. But I also like you pointing out where the position of power lies in agencies. So how do we shift the position of power then? Because we're here, to quote Mpume, what gets measured actually can change. So what do we need to do to move the power along? Where are the agencies where that power has shifted and we've seen success as an example? And what are some of the things that we can start to mirror in that? Now, can I ask you to contribute to this part? Because it's now about looking at what we have as a result and saying, how do we shift it? It's gotta move. It's 2020, we're post-COVID, something needs to move.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like this part of the conversation is like a very interesting one where you find yourself having to go to acknowledge that you have to hold back the men. And I'm sitting here as a Black man, I've always been held back. How do you convince me to be held back still? And it's a challenging thing. So the psyche game, it's the same amount of work we have to do around allowing women to readjust how they see themselves once they step into a workspace, is the same amount of work that we have to do for men. And I think it's actually a tougher one because we grow up going, oh, that's what a man does. And to say, no, actually hold back so that women get into that space, it's a much, much, much deeper work. And that's why I referenced the fact that it has to start in the home. It's not something that's going to happen once somebody arrives in the workplace when the groundwork wasn't done. But I've always had to fight. And it's so weird for me and how I apply it, and this is like a personal thing. How I look at people is I've always wanted an equal opportunity, and I'd love to give people an equal opportunity. And also in acknowledging the fact that women have been pushed back for a long time. And I think over time, we've realized as well that once women are in leadership, there's also a tone that changes in how the business or the environment runs. And I think it automatically somehow becomes inclusive, and inclusive more of the part that says that people are allowed to be. And there is no operating on fear, whereas most of the male leadership style is on this or else, So I think that the opportunities are clear, but the journey to get there, it's much, much more complex. But in allowing ourselves to acknowledge and look at how do we deal with this psychological dilemma that we need to change. And I can't say I have the answer, but I think one of the ways what I talk to when I talk to the women in my teams is when I've identified somebody who has leadership qualities, it's also to convince them that I'm convinced that they have what it takes to be everything they want to be. And I just want to bring back another part to this whole everyone in creative wants to be a CCO. I don't think that's the truth. I think it is a much more, most people are afraid of the position, and it is a tough position that male and female, it's not automatic that people want it, because creatives want to create and make things. But once you get into ECD role, even creative director role, you lose a big chunk of the exercise of creativity because you have to hand it over to other people. And I think that we need to have a balance around whether there's a lot of people wanting the position, but the ones that are identified should be given the space and be helped to get to that spot. And as an industry, we should put measures to do that.
Is there a role that the client as a partner in creative plays? You know, we are a creative industry. We shape culture. We're building for future. We are the people who should be progressive and transformed. And we have partners we work with, which is your clients and agencies work together on this. Is there a role that clients should be playing in bringing this inclusivity journey into fruition? You know, should clients also be asking for more representation? Mpume, I don't know if you have a view on that.
So I do. And my answer to that question is absolutely. Clients should demand facts, and they should actually want to understand what kind of partner they're getting into bed with. And I believe that clients need to make transformation, representation a criteria when selecting agencies. And another thing is that agencies ultimately exist at the behest of our clients. And so clients need to use that muscle. They need to exercise that muscle when they're choosing the agency to partner with. I was actually reading an Accenture 2019 study that spoke about, you know, improving how gender parity can unlock 319 billion rands into the South Africa's GDP. And I mean, as a client, you should be interested in that, right? Because if we're an industry that spends 63 billion rand on media in 1 year alone, surely the focus on getting it right should be an imperative when clients appoint agencies.
And we're now in a near post-COVID environment. We need to be looking at ourselves a little bit differently. And obviously, I assume COVID has had a lot of impact on how you've been progressing with your, not just your gender representation agenda, but inclusivity as a whole. And I'm wondering, what has COVID done to your businesses, and what can you do to reframe what the future can look like? Jared, if you could offer an opinion on that one.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I just wanted to say before I do that is just the South African challenge around racial equality and gender equality is quite different in my experience to what a lot of other countries that, although the racial issues are there globally, they're very much at the forefront of what we grapple with. So when you ask the question about clients have actually driven a racial transformation agenda quite effectively. In fact, they've been a lot better than agencies have at transforming. And they have insisted on people of color being on their accounts. I'm not sure I see the same pressure around women, and I think, you know, so what Neo says is exactly right. As a black person, he's had to fight, you know, his whole life to get where he has, and we should celebrate the fact that that transformation has happened. But I think we have to make space for gender transformation at the same time somehow, because otherwise we're going to end up with, you know, with a transformed but very male dominated environment at the end of the day, and that will only be half the battle won. You know, it's important, but it's not the whole story. And I think my experience of clients is they're once your team has people of color on it, they're satisfied. They're not going, but where are the women, you know? And never mind all the other stuff Mpume referenced around other diversity beyond that. I think in terms of COVID, I mean, the point that I think is important to say is we were lucky enough to have Edgar's as a client. So, you know, within about 2 weeks of COVID hitting, we had a massive impact on our business, and we ended up having to let some people go. And that exercise was, I mean, it's heartbreaking to have to let people go anyway. But, you know, based on how labor laws work and based on where people of color and women are in the pecking order, to some extent they were disproportionately impacted by that process. And I'm not sure if that's been true for other agencies, but it's certainly because they're newer employees, they are kind of up and coming, they're not the people in established roles. I worry that COVID has potentially set back some of our transformation agenda. It certainly has to some extent in our business, and we've tried to mitigate it. But I'm interested to see where the industry lands as all of us work through the kind of impact on our businesses. Whether we're still going to have the money and the resource to invest in the transformative stuff that we were doing before COVID came along.
You're highlighting something that I've been thinking about, and Mpume, I'll let you comment on that in a second, but it's about the BE agenda, including women, almost coupling it in, but you can achieve your BE status without necessarily including women of color. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the picture that started to permeate, and that's why you hear a lot of women of color saying, we feel like we've been left behind. And Mpume, I saw your hand there on this one. Do you want to comment on that? Because it is what Jared touched on is very important. Go for it.
Exactly. I was getting heated under the collar there, because I think the triple BE, and yes, not to undermine the codes and the role that they play in the greater transformation agenda in corporate SA as a whole. But we have to acknowledge that they're all about compliance and license to trade, and it ends there. And the nuances that the codes are missing, and nuances that they could never take into account and they could never measure. And there's a lot of those nuances, and I've mentioned them. So the codes are black and white, and the world and the dynamic is not black and white. Pride mentioned empathy, I mentioned intersectionality, and as I said, those things are not covered in the codes. So I think we have to go beyond triple BE compliance, and clients have to enforce that actually, so that, we find progress. We find progress in this industry.
I find myself in a very awkward place because I was saying, what you can measure, you can create progress on. And what triple BE was meant to do was measure something. But we obviously now see that empathy needs to be applied before you can actually transform something into a tangible measurement. Camilla, I wanted to ask you about the COVID conversation in your environment, because what Jared was referring to in how that's impacted their transformation agenda, is there more that you've seen that has happened differently in your environment that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously mirror a lot that Jared has said. COVID has changed everything. And obviously it's been incredibly tough to see the repercussions that this virus has brought. But, I think it is possible to look at it from a slightly different perspective as well. And I think for myself and my team, it's definitely broken a lot of constructs that we've been following, throughout our advertising lives. And for that, I'm sort of pretty excited, so we've obviously taken the office now outside of the office. Everyone's sitting in their own spaces, where they're comfortable and where they are happy to work from. For us, we've managed to cast the net a lot wider. So now it's not just who's in the city and who can travel into the agency, but it's can we start bringing in people who maybe don't have transportation in, etc. And something I was actually thinking about yesterday, and it just came to me, and it could be sort of slightly controversial, but this idea of 9 to 5, I'm telling you, must have been devised by men.
I am man.
Sorry, men, but I mean, 9 to 5, I couldn't think of a more impractical time for people for women to work. And I think what this has done is it's given women the time to do the things that are necessary as well. So deal with the kids, get hold of the grandparents, whatever is needed, but work when they actually can full-heartedly concentrate on it. So, you know, I almost want to say that maybe this is a chance for women to come forward and excel. And I think a lot of the conversations I've had with my mates who are moms, being able to, you know, kick off at 6 a.m. and have a break at 10 to sort of sort out the kids, or have a break during 4 in order to take them to the next place, has been invaluable. So yeah, maybe it's shifting the dial a bit.
Now, I saw you getting worked up there.
No, I think that probably the other shift that we have to make, and like this is for both male and female, is the idea that the kid's responsibility lies with the mom. You know, like I think that starting there, we will be preparing the boy child for the future and the girl child for the future to go, actually, these roles are not determined by your gender, but they are roles and responsibilities for parenting. And things should work to what you are comfortable with the most as an individual, or within a partnership, whichever partnership you are in. You should be going, I prefer to do this. And once we start allowing more for that, and even in our day-to-day speak around things, as I was listening to you, Camilla, you spoke around it as things that should still remain as responsibilities for women. And I think that we should allow that space to go, no, actually, the raising of the child is a responsibility of both parents. And I think it would also create a bigger shift within the male psyche around compassion and understanding the softest parts within themselves, because we do have these, but it's just how we've been trained.
Go, Camilla.
Completely hear you, and I think in an ideal world, that's exactly the route we should be taking. But I think for the here and now, something has to be done. And I think while the parental responsibility still somehow lends itself more to women, we've got to sort of shift and morph how we can. And I think if we're going to do something immediately, it's the small practical steps we put in place, which for me is flexible work hours, etc. But I completely agree that from a future perspective, that's where we need to be headed.
Camilla, I want to actually hang on to something you said, which is practical shifts that can happen now. I have to be honest, sitting here, I'm listening to progressive ideas that can work. I also know that if this was a campaign brief, there'd be even more progressive ideas that we'd come up with. What if companies did this? What if companies did that? But the challenge here is you are the companies, you are the industry, you are sitting here today as those people. So what are some of the key quick shifts we know we can make? I know when level 1 arrives, we're gonna go back to 9 to 5. We're gonna go back to really heavy hours. We're gonna go back to the aggressive pace, which we are still in aggressive pace, but it's gonna go back. What do we do now that's gonna make things a little differently? How do we hold meetings differently? What are some of those things that we can start actually just pinpointing and shifting now? Any of you are welcome to contribute.
So I've heard quite a lot, and it remains to be seen if this is the case, but I've heard a lot of people talking about we'll never go back to that life. Certainly in our agency, we're never going back to that life. We will work remotely. We'll give up a lot of our office space that's consuming a lot of cost that we don't need to spend. So for us, it has, but I mean, I come from a digital world. So to me, this has all been like quite easy and quite comfortable in some ways. I think the biggest challenge is people who don't have amazing homes and incredible fiber connections, and there's that whole problem. But I'd rather spend money on helping people to sort out that part of their home than spend renting parking spaces in Sandton. I think that, I've heard quite a lot of people say this. So there's been quite a lot of surveys done where, the vast majority of people are saying, we don't want to go back to that world. But it remains to be seen, that I agree with what Camilla said about who designed the workplace. It's a very, very hierarchical, male-dominated type model. I mean, our industry is perfectly suited for young single people and men who don't have responsibilities in the home. The minute you are someone who has responsibilities in the home, whether you're a man or a woman, and it is generally women, and I think women that are trying to homeschool their kids now while doing a Zoom call, while kind of, the burden is huge. And I think those companies that have enabled women to have flexi time during their days are probably finding, in my experience, women with kids are the most productive people that work for us, because they have, a very limited amount of time to get stuff done, and they're very productive during that time. So I think hopefully we can learn that. I mean, on the other hand, I heard about one of the big corporates who is using their chat program, whatever they use, to monitor how long people are sitting at their computers for, and then giving people warnings if they step away from their computer too long. So clearly they're going back to 9 to 5 as quickly as possible.
I have to leave this moment to answer a few questions. I see some coming on the side here. One says, to the panelists, with tech or creative career streams, do you see women leaving agency spaces for less male-dominated environments? And are we not seeing young women wanting those roles? I think this goes back to our first conversation around, is this a coveted role or not? Are we seeing more women leaving the creative environment, maybe jumping ship to client side? Neo?
I think there's a part in our industry that we are struggling to compete on is money. In the greater scheme of things, when your options are in creative, we are better off than the artists that sit at home and create whatever they want to create in their brains, but they are better off opportunities. And mostly I find that Black females would want to go, what are the spaces that would allow me to take my family and my siblings out of their situation right now? So most of the decision making is not around the individual, is the individual and the people around that individual. So when they're given an opportunity, if somebody is in creative and they love the creative environment, but they know that they can also leave and go into and work for the clients internally, and even double the amount, that's the option they'll take. But also once you're choosing a career, then the family environment and parents, uncles, and everybody are part of the decision making. You want this thing, but they are guiding you to the light, and the light is better pay. And if you compare our starting pay versus other industries, it's peanuts. I know that it will shock everyone that, or maybe it won't shock you guys, because to think that in our industry, I think we are probably one of the lowest entry-level careers that you have to pay a lot of money to study for, to get into. And your hope is that your salary will increase, will be accelerated. I've always thought that when I was a junior, there was people were earning well. When I looked up, people were living the life, and I'm going what happened to the money? Where is this money? I want it. And that's the reality with our studios. That's why we struggle with keeping talent within the agencies. The next agency that wins the big account can offer a little bit more, and they destabilize their competition around in the environment, whether it's particularly for when you are going for the black female. It's like to keep people, it's much more harder. And I think your only hope is having an environment that allows people to thrive, and they believe that it's the right environment. But like, it's very difficult to compete with a 40% salary increase.
Mpumi, why did you stay?
I have no idea.
every month, Mpume is going, I could be getting double. I could be getting triple.
No, but Neil was right. Hey? The reality is that the advertising industry is a passion industry, and it doesn't pay, okay? And the reason why people stay, it's because of their passion. And, you know, people have to prioritize between passion and life. And we often find that it is actually at the midweight level where we have the opportunity to have the biggest room for impact, because those are the people that tend to leave the industry. Those are the people that tend to get offered high salaries that we can't match as an industry, right? Because the juniors are still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They're still figuring themselves out. And the senior guys have already committed to the industry. So there's an opportunity for us to really try, you know, give an opportunity to the midweight people, make the environment suitable for them so that they do stay and do realize their passion in their lives.
Okay.
I think we've traded off the passion thing for a long time, you know, and I haven't been in the ad industry for that long. I was in the software business for most of my career, but the ad industry trades on this passion thing a lot. And I think it's a little bit of a tired story, because the truth of the matter is that a lot of the world is caught up with us. You know, it's true to say that 20 years ago, you know, if you worked at a bank or you worked in a tech company, it was cubicles and, you know, but actually a lot of our client organizations and a lot of companies out there have very progressive environments. They offer amazing benefits. I mean, you know, if you want to work anywhere amazing, you're going to go and work at Google or Facebook. You know, these incredible paid packages, amazing flexibility, great technology. So I think we have to be careful. I mean, the truth is that, you know, those of us who are part of global agency networks, you know, these days you're just as constrained by budgets and SOX compliance and all of these corporate strictures as anybody else is. So I think that the passion piece, in order for that to be true, you know, we have to work really hard to actually make our environments, you know, I think that circles back to this conversation. I think if we can make our environments truly empowering and really equal, and we can really offer that, then there's a value proposition. But otherwise, you know, people can get a lot of the frills that you're used to getting in an agency, you know, and a lot of other places these days.
Passion is
Go Mpumi.
Passion is important. And luckily for us, we're not constrained by the global parameters.
Yeah,
so
not yet.
For that.
I'm sure someone will buy you eventually, I'm sure.
Okay. But anyway.
I still think, and we're probably laboring on this question too much, that yes, money is a driver, of course. Passion is a driver, absolutely. But I think the biggest driver of all at the moment is self-belief and being able to grow individuals. So, I mean, I think, well, let's talk about myself as an example. As a young female creative, I would shit myself going into a place like Google or Facebook back in the day, and I don't know if I'd be able to do it. I think if you can offer a space that truly nurtures women and allows them to thrive, it's the biggest driver we can offer at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's true.
True. I'm looking at the time, and I just want to summarize a lot of the thoughts that have permeated this conversation. I think the first is just the understanding of the difference between diversity and inclusivity and know which one you are driving, because it's very important for the quality of difference you want to make in your organization. I think there's a lot that's been said that actually places this industry as the one that should be progressive in the work we put out, but we should now start questioning, how are we putting out this work and with who? And if the with whom is not inclusive, then we aren't actually truly transformational and progressive. I think there's a lot of patient coaching and mentoring that needs to happen in order for us to find our way to include more women in spaces. The word empathy came up a lot in this conversation, and I think it's very important. I go back to the idea of our psyche needs to evolve individually as a whole, how men arrive at the office and how women arrive at the office, and the spaces that we create for them to actually thrive and put themselves out there. I think we also spoke about how COVID actually gives us an opportunity to go into the post-COVID environment as the progressive industry we want to be. So not necessarily going back to the things that haven't worked for us. We've got great opportunities to do better. We didn't touch a lot on what Jared spoke about when he said that this COVID has impacted negatively on some of the transformation agenda. But I think that should leave a lot for all of us to think about in this moment. When you look at the survey, ask yourselves, how do we reverse some of that as we try and get out of this COVID negativity into something more encouraging? I like the feedback that there are women who want to be in creative spaces. They are passionate and they're willing to work for that little penny now. So how do we make room for them to stay in the industry, because it's important? I don't know if there's any other closing remarks that any of you want to offer. Camilla, you're smiling. You good?
Great.
All right.
Let's go more wine.
Can I just say, I really recommend that people read the report, because it's actually a fantastic piece of work. I wasn't involved in it, but I saw a draft of it today, and it's a fantastic piece of work. It's beautifully designed and it's well written, and I really encourage everyone to read it, because data usually doesn't look that good. Not that it's telling a happy story necessarily, but it looks good.
I really, detailed, Jared, everything is said.
Thank you very much. I think, yes, the report will be available. I think the link will be sent on the side in the chat, so do have a look. If you'd like to leave more questions, please do, and we'll find a way to answer them. We do have our Instagram and Twitter platform that we will use to answer some of these questions. I'm hoping we will have another conversation to see how well we're doing. Yes, Neil?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that COVID gave us an opportunity to understand how powerful we are if we set our mind to changing how we do things, and the fact that the way things are not necessarily the right way and are not necessarily there because that's the way it works. We have the ability to change into whichever space we want to go into. Like Jared said, that we are relooking our agency and how we work. We are not going, we're not gonna go back. We're not gonna go back completely to where we were, but we are gonna take the things that work with working from home and the things that work with working together. There's certainly departments where now and again you want to have the same people in one room, because in the creative space, we feed off each other. But I think the most powerful thing that COVID gave us is the fact that if we put our minds to something, as an industry, as a country, and as like just human beings, we know now for a fact that we can decide to do whatever thing we want to do. And we should take that opportunity in addressing these issues that we are discussing.
And Camilla?
Last thing, I promise. But I think that, you know, all our agencies are very competitive, especially when it comes to pitch time, which is this very time right now. But this is an industry thing, this is a country thing, and I think we actually all need to work together to make this change happen. So if you happen to have a creative at your agency, a female creative who isn't happy, get hold of someone else at another agency in order to see if something can work better there, or if that's a better fit. I think we need to do everything we can to work together to really bring attention to this and make it a success.
Now that's progressive. Thank you. The survey is live. The link is on the side. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Camilla, Jared, Neo, Mpume, thank you so much for your transparency, your input, for representing your teams, your thinking. And I'm hoping next year when we sit together, we will. I hope I get to ask you the questions, and I hope we get to see a different number here and there, a little bit of a balance and a lot of progressive action from all the agencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.